That was white men's way of emasculating black men in order for them to not have children. If we're being honest, I don't even want some of my celebrities to blow up the way that they are, because I don't need them to be famous where they're doing rituals and devil sacrifices. I'm good.
Yo, Pierre, you want to come out here?
In New York, I'm in New York. Riding in my socks, running from a and I shoot at
Jumbo everyone, welcome back. And in today's video, I'm going to be filming a little bit of a controversial one. What's new? What's new? Don't come for me. Today I'm going to be talking about the one drop rule and how it affected biracial identity within the US, especially back then and now. So let's get started. The reason why I wanted to film this video in the first place is because I do have a biracial mother. If y'all didn't know, my mother is Liberian and Lebanese, but also with coming to America at such a young age and with me being the first generation American children in America, if that makes sense, within my family. So I think it can also really allow me to see the dynamics, the history of everything that went on and kind of how my mom navigated her biracial identity in a predominantly white institution, aka America. So just also that's kind of why I wanted to write about this. Kind of just shows me how biracial identity is treated in the US. A lot of the times when you ask a biracial person what do they identify as, a lot of the times they're gonna say black. And I kind of wanted to dig into the history of that, dig a little bit deeper and see why do biracial people identify as black or instead of biracial. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, and that's what I did for my AFRO final. I wrote a good 13 pages on this shit. If you want to go read it for yourselves, all the sources are linked below within this paper. So if you really want to go read what I had to write, the link will be down in the description. I'm kind of going to be just making a video version based off of my actual paper. So that's kind of like the vibe I'm going to be going off of. If you do end up reading it, a lot of the stuff that I'm saying from there is going to be included in here. What does biracialism even have to do with slavery in the first place? Of course, everything is rooted in slavery, and yet I'm going to make a video about that because I really feel like a lot of people don't know just how many things come out of slavery. And one of the things to come out of slavery was a whole new generation of biracial people. Within slavery, with all the racism going on, why would there even be a new boom of biracial people? What would make the slave masters reproduce / rape black women in order for them to, you know, create this new generation? Well, the transatlantic slave trade was banned in 1808. If you didn't know, slavery didn't become abolished, and I use that very, very lightly. It didn't become abolished until 1865. So within that almost 60-year period, slave masters had to find a new means of replenishing the slaves that they were losing out on them not being able to take them from their home country anymore and just throw them right into slavery. Slave masters were like, okay, so if I can't go across, you know, whatever to get them, I'ma just make these bitches myself. And a lot of you may ask, instead of just having black slaves reproduce with each other, why did the white man take it upon himself to reproduce with the slaves? To answer that question, we have to think of what are even the family dynamics now, today. Do we see a black man being the really head of the household? Not really. So the breakage of that household came way back in slavery. A lot of people think that, you know, the breakage of the family dynamic happened back in the 1970s when the war on drugs and the mass incarceration was going on within the black community. But like I said, everything is rooted in slavery. So if you take it back just a couple hundred years, you will see that instead of white men allowing black men to just reproduce with the black women slaves, they took it upon themselves. Why? Because they didn't want the black men to have any type of connection with the child. If you are already putting someone through so much torture, why would you, one, give them the pleasure of even having sex? Let's be real. Let's be real. Why would you give them the pleasure of having sex and then creating a new child to have a bond with that child? Then them seeing that child can make them have ideas of like, I want to run away, I want to save my child. So it's just like, let's be fucking real. The white man is who created this class system, and that's why I will always say when thinking of black people and white people, it goes white men, white women, black men, then black women. Of course, black women are always at the bottom. But when I say that, it's just to say as that was white men's way of emasculating black men in order for them to not have children. So instead, they're now seeing a whole bunch of biracial children running around the plantation instead of, you know, their own children being able to tell them what to do. They can't do that because that's not their kid. You see what I'm saying? Also, wow, the connection. Also, if you don't realize, the white man has been the one to break the family family dynamic of the black community since slavery. If you really think about it, everybody can be mad at the black man for not being the head of the household, but who was the one to A, not give them that opportunity in the first place, and B, left the black women to raise the children on their own? So of course black women are going to take that masculine role of being both mother and father. Oh my god, that was wow. A lot of y'all may be asking, what does the one drop rule have to do with anything I'm even talking about and biracial identity in the first place? Because white men were reproducing with black women in the first place and, you know, creating these illegitimate children, at the end of the day they're still your kids. So it's just seeing them, white people, there was never a reason for white people to be in slavery, right? So if biracial people who are not quite white, you still have to make a reason for them to be able to be in slavery. You still have to come up with a justification as to why your child, who is part white, is even in slavery in the first place. So they came up with the one drop rule, which is essentially if you even have a drop of black ancestry in you, you are black. So even if you are white passing, you're still technically black. So that's where it just, like, even looking at the biracial identity today, the subconscious thoughts that we have when it comes to biracial identity and why we just choose to identify people who are biracial as black is because of the subconscious thing that happened in history over hundreds of years ago, because they didn't want biracial people to have their own identity. They just wanted to slide them off, consider them black, so then they wouldn't be able to get the same advantages of white people, but at the same time still allowing them to have that extra bit of oomph of privilege because of their lighter skin. Let's be real when we look at colorism today. Who benefits more from colorism? Light-skinned people or dark-skinned people? Light skin. Thank you very much. So that's what I mean by biracial, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault that they had a parent that was black and white, chose to reproduce, boom, they're biracial, and they get the advantages of a white person. I'm thankful for my friend Kai, who allowed me to interview her, and that will kind of be a discussion that's at the end of the video, just kind of asking her questions about her identity. In this portion, I'm just going to focus mainly on the essay part, and then at the end of the video, that's when I will show that interview between me and Kai, just to make it flow a little bit better. With that being said, my thesis of this video is going to be, with this new tactic in play of white men raping black women, white men were able to increase their means of labor and wealth while socially dividing a community further based off the advantages of being biracial. This is gonna be a long video, so strap your motherfucking boots on. Let's go, okay? This was a 13-page paper. I'm gonna try to, you know, compress it down. There's a lot of shit to say, and there's a lot of connecting points that can make it make sense as to why we are living the way that we're living today. So Angela Davis even said herself, and I'm gonna be reading it off my computer just so I say it accurately, reproducing enslaved people was a form of control and colonization that increased the surplus of value of property through the reproduction of a new enslaved generation. When the abolition of international slave trade began to threaten the expansion of the young cotton growing industry, the slave holding class was forced to rely on natural reproduction as the surest method of replenishing and increasing the domestic slave population. So like I said earlier, you have to also think of why white men did this in the first place, and it's not because they loved black women or, you know, they wanted to have that control over them as a sense of, I can do whatever I want with your body and you have no bodily autonomy, therefore leading to them having to be forced to raise children. And I think it also just, like, in a sense, just adds a lot of resentment that carried on throughout generations, because if you have a black mother and a biracial child that she didn't really want during slavery, how is that not going to hold resentment? How is that not going to, not only if your mother didn't necessarily like want you like that and your dad is white and they don't claim your ass, it's gonna cause for this very confusing biracial identity and trying to know, where do you hold space? You're not quite white to hold space in the white space, and you're not quite black to be black enough. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of this like very confusing identity that nobody really talks about when it comes to biracial identity, because they were forced to just be considered black. They weren't biracial. Biracialism had affected the social construction of race when it came to the one drop rule, just because of the advantages that they had. You have someone who is both white and black, but in society it's saying that white is right but black is not good enough. So it's like, what advantages do they get? So a lot of people who were biracial would completely abandon their black side if they were light enough to pass. During my research, a lot of the times I saw biracial people wanting to just completely not claim their black side at all, because they would rather live in a world where they didn't have to go through racism than endure racism and be considered black even though their skin was light enough to pass as a white person. So for them, if they were fair enough to pass, they would completely just like not even want to be connected to their black side at all, leading to a lot of confusion and just the start of a new life. While researching, I saw that when a child who was biracial was raised by their white counterparts or their white family respectively, and something were to happen to them, their life would be turned upside down. And I think it just showed the realization of knowing that at the end of the day, biracial people were still looked at as black. Throughout my research, one of the sources that I found was Challenging the Tragic Mulatta, and it was basically just explaining the life of a biracial child, that something happened to her white father, grandfather, who was taking care of her, and basically her life turned upside down because nobody was there to take care of her. As she grew up and identifying with this white side of her, she never identified as her black side. Because she was white passing, she was able to be with a white man and, you know, have his child, but they weren't able to get married because back then a lot of interracial marriages were banned. Interracial marriage literally didn't become legal until when? Let's see. Interracial marriage didn't become legal until 1967. So get the fuck out my face when people be talking about, oh, da, da, da. No. These biracial women, even though they were passing as white, at the end of the day, everybody knew if you had a child, that child would still be able to show your black side. One of the best examples I can get from this is Piola in the movie Imitation of Life. If you haven't seen that movie, it's a really good movie. It's about this mother and her child, and they basically need to, like, it's a whole movie, okay? It basically just reminds me of Aunt Jemima. That's all I gotta say. Within that movie, Delilah basically has a very fair-skinned child named Piola, and throughout the film, Piola she hates her black side. She absolutely disdains it, even from a child, because she sees how she is treated, I guess, in a sense of, I think it's more of seeing how her mother is treated, and how even though she's a very fair-skinned child, her mother, who is a very dark-skinned woman, is treated like, as they say back then, a mammy. She's taking care of the household. She is allowing B to basically have this business, and without the business, without Delilah, the business wouldn't thrive. So I think it's also just showing how, like, black women are expected to do everything, the child work, the food, cleaning the house, all this other, running businesses, yet they're still expected to not want anything. So I think it kind of just like shows, even at the end of the movie, where Piola comes back and she's a grown woman and she's like, the only reason why I'm coming back is to sever all ties with you, because I cannot have people finding out that I am a biracial woman at the end of the day. Even though she's very, very white passing, biracial people still, that's the thing with a black woman, we can create any race. Even though our traits are dominant, we can still create a very fair-skinned, blue-eyed child, which is the crazy thing of things. So one of the quotes that really plays into this is from Piola when she's talking to her mom and saying that she is marrying a white man and basically she can't have any connection to her black life. I think this is most prominent when the quote says, "While it is true that Piola takes ownership of her own sexuality and refuses to accept motherhood as an inevitable outcome of entering marriage, what this reading neglects is the fact that she does not do so because she is sexually liberating young woman, but rather out of fear of having to one day acknowledge her racial heritage. Instead of embracing this aspect of her identity, Piola takes the drastic action of ensuring that she will never continue her own family line." Come on now. So I think it also just shows the aspect of what biracial people were willing to go through to not identify with their black side at all. This one drop rule really just allowed them to not even have a biracial identity in itself, because I get it, back then it was very racist. Like, we know that, we live in America. So it's just like accepting the fact that this rule affected so many of biracial people's lives that a lot of them were either like, you know, if I'm white enough, I will white pass, but if I simply cannot, then I'm black. And I think that's what we see a lot of the times for biracial people today, is like, who are simply biracial, they have features of both their black parents and their white parents, and it's like them being forced to be black and just, you know, everything. But then it also shows just like within the colorism, within society and everything else, they're still treated better. They still have more opportunities. They're like, I see a lot of just creators in general who blow up a lot quicker. And I'm not saying it's because they're biracial, but I do think, like, let's take an example for Ice Spice versus Flo Milli. As you can see, I'm repping my bitch Flo Milli. But this was like a Instagram thread I'd seen years ago. And even then, like, I was still a Flo Milli fan. I've been a Flo Milli fan since Beef came out, since her first song came out. So I am happy that I can say that. But with me saying that, it also just shows Flo Milli has been doing her shit since 2018. And just now people are giving her her flowers and her roses. Ice Spice, I get it. The only reason, let's be honest, that she blew up is because she has a very nice body and she's light skinned. Let's be honest. If Ice Spice was rapping the same lyrics that she was rapping fucking as a black woman, as a dark skinned woman, she would not be popular. Let's be real. real. Let's just be fucking honest. Ice Spice would not be where she is today if she wasn't biracial or light skinned. Is Ice Spice even fucking biracial? Okay, so she's African American and Dominican. Okay, so Ice Spice is biracial. And oh, speaking of, thank you. So with me looking up that Ice Spice is African American and Dominican, it reminds me of that video of the dude where he's like, this is how Dominican people be. I know black, I know black, I know black.
I know black, I know black, I know black. Impossible, I know black. I'm Dominican, I'm Puerto Rican, I know black. Be looking just like me. Be having the same hair. I be touching it like, it's not the same, it's not the same. It's not the same, papi. It's not the same. They try to salsa that shit off. I be like, no, it's not the same. I know black. Negro nunca, nunca. I know no, nunca. I know black. I'm like, no, you black. No. I know black. Dominica. I go, I know, but you're black. No, papi. I know black.
And it's like, nigga, you are though. But with Ice Spice, she is a very light-skinned woman who is also very thick and curvy. Let's just say that. But also I think, cause y'all, everything is way too connected and I don't even think y'all want me to get into it, but it's just like, we need to be serious. Who are they uplifting? Don't get me wrong, cause Ice Spice was she was my top 4 for fucking Spotify rap. I love me a good Ice Spice song and I do be shaking my ass. But at the end of the day, we have to realize what artists are putting in their fucking work. I just seen fucking Maya the Dawn, Flo Milli, Mona Leo, Lotto, and there's like one more girl all doing an XXL. Yet Ice Spice be coming out with, she be sprinkling songs, and literally she went to the Met Gala. If we're being honest, I don't even want some of my celebrities to blow up the way that they are, because I don't need them to be famous where they're doing rituals and devil sacrifices. I'm good. I don't know, I think it also just shows like it's very obvious to see who they push when it comes to certain things and how biracial identity can literally give you the privileges of a white person. Who has Nicki ever collabed with that was a new artist? At least, I'm not a barb, so please don't come for me. But at least like in that aspect, it just shows like the advantages of blowing up and having a nice body with being biracial versus being a dark-skinned woman in this industry. People are not getting the appropriate flowers that they should be, aka my bitch Flo Milli. Leading that back to the essay, I just want to point out another quote that I found while doing this essay. So this is like kind of my paragraph. I said, for a lot of biracial people, because of the environment and the time period they were in, a lot of them gravitated towards passing as white because they saw how they didn't have to be a victim of racism. Reese explains this by stating, many of them were active participants in socially distancing themselves from their black counterparts and sought to maintain that distance through establishing their own communities and, when possible, emulating the behavior of affluent white people. Come on, it shows just how deep white supremacy goes. And even with this one drop rule, making biracial people, by saying you are fucking black, even if you are white passing as fuck, just saying that you are black and not allowing them to have that biracial identity forces them to pick a side. Are they black or are they white? And a lot of the times they will abandon that black side just to not deal with the racism. To keep going on this fact, just another quote where it says, historical African Americans whose skin tone was light enough to pass as white were faced with the choice of whether to publicly live as a white person or a black individual. Many African Americans decided on the former choice as a means to avoid oppression of racism and take advantages of the opportunities that would ordinarily be available identifying as black. Identifying with a particular racial group is a byproduct of one's psychological attachment to a social category based on race, skin color, or common history of discrimination and oppression based on physical characteristics. So I feel like that in a sense just shows the disadvantages that biracial people would have to go through. Whether are they going to identify as white and have the privilege, or do they not even look white passing enough to identify as white passing to then get those advantages? So they're biracial, but still everyone around them, because of this one drop rule, considers them black. How this could be connected to slavery, I'm just gonna be going on a quote tangent real quick just to prove to y'all like what the fuck I've been saying is right. Another quote from Nikki Kahana, I think that's how you say her name, in her paper, If You're Half Black, You're Just Black. She goes on to explain, to deal with the growing number of multiracial children, an informal one-drop rule was born in the South. Anyone with any trace of black blood was considered black. Thus, mulatto children of enslaved mothers were classified as black and remained slaves, which provided economic assets to white slaveholders. Because slavery was built upon the assumption that whites were a superior race and could not be enslaved, the one-drop rule also became increasingly important to justify the enslavement of growing numbers of slaves with white skin and appearance. Come on! I love being right. So obviously with the negative perception of being black, a lot of biracial people are not going to want to have to identify as black. And even, I feel like even in a sense today, biracial people kind of resent black people for even having to identify as black, even though it's not their fault because of the one drop rule that was created by white men back then to justify the enslavement of the biracial children and the rapage of the mothers. Anger isn't directed towards the right people. You know, like I kind of don't even get me started on white mothers who purposefully are like snow bunnies and just want to breed black children just so they can make biracial children with blue and green eyes and names are Jaden, Hayden, all that other bullshit. Like, don't get me started on that, because it's just like that is what confuses biracial kids' identity in the first place, is not fully allowing them to, yes, live in their white environment, but also showing them the culture that they have with being black as well. Biracial means two races. That doesn't mean that you have to just discount what it's like being black or white. And I feel like a lot of the times when I have conversations with biracial people and they tell me that they identify as black, they literally want nothing to do with their white sides. And I really do believe it's this like subconscious knowing of what was going on back then, because this one drop rule, like if even mixed people today are saying that they're black, it's because of this. Especially in a world that doesn't really allow you to identify as biracial. They just tell you like to identify as black. And then the hard part is when issues are happening within the black community, the shootings, all that other stuff, I really don't see biracial people anywhere. When any issues happen with police brutality, I don't be seeing any biracial people fighting for our cause. That's just me. That's just me. I say some. I'm not talking about you. If you take this offense, then I guess it is about you. Shit. But what a lot of people fail to realize is just like the systems that were set up by the white man for us to be divided. And that is why within the black community, I say like, yes, biracial people are still a part of the black. I said, even if the white community doesn't want to claim biracial people, at the end of the day, black people will claim biracial people because they're just a subcategory of them. I think just another form of fear, how the US just runs off of fear, is another quote where it says, Sweet provides evidence that certain whites accused other whites of passing for white. In some of these instances, whites were accused of being invisibly black if they were seen talking to blacks or even just laughing at a joke told by a black person. And it's the crazy idea of like just pointing the finger and making sure that you're safe in order to keep this society going, where even if you're considered one drop of black, you're considered black. To further support my claim when it comes to what I mean about just having that one drop of black blood, it was famously said by Booker T. Washington when he says, "It is in fact, if a person is known to have 1% of African blood in his veins, he ceases to be a white man. The 99% of Caucasian blood does not weigh by the side of the 1% of African blood. This person is a Negro every time." Booker T. Washington was living way back then. So it's like for him to say this, it just proves how even it manifested into what we have today, on how a lot of biracial people just identify as black because that's the one drop rule. They're not, it almost seems as if they're not allowed to live in their biracial identity because of this one drop rule. Like the biracial identity doesn't even exist because of the one drop rule. That's literally my whole claim right here. That is my whole claim. The reason why a lot of biracial people only identify with one singular race, whether it be white or black, is because of the one drop rule. The one drop rule forced them to not have an identity. It forced them to be black. That is why we see today a lot of biracial people identifying as black but not ever truly knowing the full experience of what it is like to live as a black person. When people see you, they automatically assume you're black, but at least when you're biracial, people can first assume that you're mixed, then they go on to, okay, you're black. To end this video off, I just want to read my conclusion to y'all to really just wrap up everything that I'm trying to say. I said, furthermore, the creation of the systems that hold true today are subconsciously how people think today about certain groups of people. White men needed to create justification for producing illegitimate children, as a result leading to the one drop rule that would create the class systems and advantages certain races would achieve. With their means of wealth being threatened, white men raped and impregnated black women during slavery in order to create a new generation of slaves that would continue the lavish lifestyle they lived. With this selfish act came the division within a community and forcing biracial people to identify as something they simply aren't. Ah! Let me get my snaps! Let me get my snaps! Thank you very much. With that being said, I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. That was just kind of me, a little rant, a little ramble, just about biracial identity in the US and what we see today and how it manifests into how we look at different groups of people. And I will be including some of just questions that I asked Kai from a biracial person herself, especially with Kai being a little bit more fair-skinned than what you would consider as a biracial person and having blue eyes at that. So I think it kind of just like solidifies my argument. Just gonna be adding a couple clips in from our discussion from how she helped me write this essay in the first place. I didn't include a lot of her points from the essay just because I recorded it on Zoom. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I'll see y'all in my next one. Bye, y'all.
Hi everyone. This is going to be me interviewing my biracial friend Kai.
Hello, good evening.
For my essay, I asked Kai, when people ask you what you are, what do you identify as? She says, a Black biracial woman. I said, why do you lead with Black biracial? And you were saying?
I said that I lead with Black biracial just to specify, because I feel like a lot of people forget there's more than two like races of Black and white. You can be any two races and be biracial. So I lead with Black just to specify, as like every experience, like every like combination, it sounds weird to say, but like combination of races is different. Just because you're biracial, like you could be like Black and Asian, like white and Asian, like those are two different experiences. Like any combination of the races, you're gonna get a completely different life experience. So that's why I specify.
How do you feel growing up with a white mother and a Black father? Were you taught to embrace your Black side, or like was it kind of hard to navigate like, you know, your identity as a Black biracial woman?
Honestly, I didn't necessarily feel the tension. If you ask a lot of biracial kids, especially those with like a Black and white parent, how their experience was, they'll always, most of the people I know, it's like a trend. They'll talk about like the tension between like their two parents and like even like kind of like how they parent, their parenting styles, and just specific conflicts that they'll have with like one parent and not the other. I didn't necessarily start experiencing that until around like middle school when it came to like experiencing certain things. That's when I started wearing my hair natural, and I've always gone to a PWI, except when I was like in kindergarten, which really doesn't even count. Just having experiences with that and natural hair and how those two things don't really like clash, I experienced a lot more conflicts regarding my Blackness. And that's when I started to realize that, oh, I do have a white mom and a Black dad, and that's like very like, it's a humongous contrast. My mom definitely gave me space to be mixed. She never pressured me to do anything, like any one thing or like act any one way. Because there are a lot of, for instance, like wearing braids. Like the first time I came to my mom about like wearing like box braids or getting them, she was all for it. I was a little like nervous at first because it's not something that's like necessarily part of like her culture. So I wasn't sure if she was going to be skeptical, but she like always gave me space to like embrace my Black side, but also kind of like just exist. Like she didn't necessarily label it as like, oh, this is like something you need to do because like this is part of your Black culture. Like you need to do this because this is part of like my family's thing. She just gave me space to do whatever I wanted. Same with my dad, but there was a difference between how my mom kind of would not necessarily educate me. Like my mom kind of gave my dad the reins when it came to like Black issues, like in 2020, with George Floyd and everything. That was a time where it was like really awkward, not necessarily like awkward in my household, but like you could tell that like everyone was just kind of looking like for my dad's reaction on things and like how we should like as a family like discuss it and everything. She kind of gives him like the reins when it comes to like when I was little, like educating me about slavery, the N-word, things like that. That in like a whole like wholly like Black household, like that's something both parents do. But my mom definitely gave him the space to deal with that just because he knows firsthand like things that she wouldn't. So she definitely like understands her privilege like as a white woman in that way and having like biracial children with a Black man. So there was a little bit of like tension, but not necessarily like tension between like the family. It was just like how it's just a concept of like how do you like parent a child and like you're not having the same experiences as them. My dad, like from that side, he's not biracial, he's just Black. We were actually having a conversation not even like a week ago about this because we were talking about just the current political like social environment in the world, and then we got started on just identity, and he was like, oh, like I can't even imagine like navigating this world like with two like lenses. Like you have a white lens and you have a Black lens, you put them together. That's what he said. And like, he's like, you get your lens. I'm like, yeah. So he has that added, or he doesn't have that added aspect of like a white counterpart, like within yourself. So he also gives me space to not necessarily like go to my mom and like ask about white things or things just relating to like, you know, her family. It's more like you just have an added layer of questions and everything that he never had to deal with. So he also gives me room to breathe in that way. So my parents really just, they never like tried to force their opinion of like how like their children should act like on me in regards to like my identity, which I really appreciate that. They just really let me kind of navigate it myself. And like if I had questions, like I'd like go to them.
That was a really good explanation. Okay. So everyone, thanks for watching the video. I'll see you on my next one. Bye, y'all.
Can you lead me to the yard with the last word? I need you, man.